So, Ari, this has been a rather disturbing week from the perspective of voting rights in this country. We have both a ruling that is taking place in Texas, and then we have this ongoing so-called Election Integrity Commission that had I guess it's its second hearing, if you will, up in New Hampshire. Tell us about that. What is the Election Integrity Commission?
So the Election Integrity Commission was founded after Donald Trump claimed with absolutely no evidence that 3 to 5 million people voted illegally. So Trump made this ridiculous statement. Everyone said he was false, but he's the president, so he could do what he wants. And he created a commission called the Presidential Commission on Election Integrity. And this has been controversial really from the very beginning. I mean, first off, you have all of Trump's lies about voter fraud. Then you have the fact the vice chair of the commission is Kansas Secretary of State Chris Kobach, who's probably the leading figure in the Republican Party when it comes to restricting voting rights and making crazy statements about voter fraud. And then when the commission started actually doing things, the first thing they did was to request the voter data of every American, which no presidential commission or no president has ever done before, which led to a lot of fears about how they would use that data if they were given it. And the controversy has kind of just continued since then. There have been at least 7 different lawsuits against the commission. Chris Kobach this week claimed that voter fraud tipped the election in New Hampshire, which there's absolutely no evidence of. There was a lot of crazy witnesses who made really radical ideas like requiring background checks for voting. So this commission has really been a disaster from the very beginning and continues to be so.
All right, I want to back up just a moment. The idea that this commission was solely a function of Donald Trump's delusion that there were 3 to 4 million fake votes so that he could make himself feel better about having not won the popular vote. To me, that's just a cover story. I mean, is there anything that has gone on that is in any way inconsistent with the long-term agenda? I mean, you're one of the premier experts, I think, on this in the country, frankly. This seems to me to be just the normal and I guess the natural, I want to say conclusion, I wish it was, but the natural or a denouement, if you will, of what the Republicans have been trying to do either in their states or nationally. I mean, this is part of their program.
Yeah, I mean, this is in many ways a defining feature of the Republican war on voting, which is you had Republicans in states across the country since the 2010 election pass new laws to make it harder to vote. You had the Supreme Court gut the Voting Rights Act in 2013. We just came out of an election that was the first presidential election in 50 years without the full protections of the Voting Rights Act. We've had Republicans make crazy, unsubstantiated claims about voter fraud for years, and all of that culminated with the forming of this commission. I think what they're going to do is they're going to lie about voter fraud, not just Donald Trump's lie about 3 to 5 million people voting illegally, but all sorts of other lies. And then they're going to use those lies as evidence of massive voter fraud, and they're going to then try to put in place policies that further restrict voting rights. So we've already seen this at the state level, but to me, what's so disturbing about this commission is they're going to try to do what they've already done at the state level and export it, not just to more states, but try to do it on a federal level nationally as well, where you have the Justice Department getting involved, you have them making recommendations to states and Congress, you have them doing things at the administrative level, all of which is just an escalation of an already existing suppression agenda.
And I want to go through what they've done in the states, like how they go about disenfranchising voters. But I just want to make a point here of saying to our audience, this is why this is so important, is because this so-called Election Integrity Commission is being designed as a fig leaf, as an excuse for them to implement policies that will disenfranchise voters. I mean, Ari, I know you remember during the Bush administration, the big controversy about the firing of the U.S. attorneys around the country because Karl Rove was adamantly trying to get proof of voter fraud so that they could justify disenfranchising more voters. And even you had longtime U.S. attorneys who were like, look, if there was any, I would bring it to you, but I don't have it, and they'd get fired. And this is just the next step, it seems to me, in that agenda. I mean, we can go this week. There were emails that were uncovered between the Heritage Foundation and the administration that between, frankly, guys who ended up on the Election Integrity Commission basically saying you can't have any Democrats and you can't have any moderate Republicans on this commission because it's going to interfere with our agenda.
Yeah, I mean, this email was really remarkable. And you mentioned the Bush administration, and the person who wrote this email was Hans von Spakovsky of the Heritage Foundation, who was really the leading figure in the Bush administration, in the Bush Justice Department, when it came to restricting voting rights. And so von Spakovsky does all of this stuff in the Bush administration. Then he goes to the Heritage Foundation, and he's lobbying to get put on this Election Integrity Commission. But even more than that, he writes a letter which is forwarded to Attorney General Jeff Sessions that says that they need to include Democrats, that they need to include not just moderate Republicans, but what he called mainstream Republicans. So I take that as, any Republican, almost every Republican Secretary of State, save for Chris Kobach, would be considered a mainstream Republican. So they don't want any Republican secretaries of state on the commission. They don't want any academics on the commission. So anyone who studied the problem of voter fraud is off it too. And you could see that this thing from the very, very beginning, the fix was in, that this was always going to be about pushing this narrative of widespread voter fraud to then lay the groundwork for massive voter suppression. That the people on the commission have a very long history of doing that, whether it's Chris Kobach in Kansas or whether it's Hans von Spakovsky in the Bush Justice Department. But now they're all together in one place. And I worry that even though this commission is viewed as illegitimate by a lot of people, just by virtue of being a presidential commission, some people are going to take it seriously, and they're going to start to normalize more and more crazy ideas.
That is exactly my concern too, and it's the reason why we have you on here. If people go and check out, I mean, the list of people who are on this commission, the Democrats on this commission are literally county officials. County officials in from I think West Virginia and maybe Montana, who are sitting there. They're on a 10-person commission with the Vice President of the United States and with Chris Kobach, who is part of the president's transition team. They are handpicked because they're going to be amenable to this, but they're also there because they don't have the heft, frankly, to come out. No one is going to listen to the press conference from the county election official from West Virginia who sat on this commission and thought the whole process was bunk at the end of this day. The headline is going to be, commission finds this, this type of voting fraud. All right, well, listen, all right, we got to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about specifically this New Hampshire claim, and I want to talk about what they've done in the states that they want to replicate in across the country. We got to take a quick break. I'm Sam Seder. This is Ring of Fire Radio. I'm talking to the great Ari Berman. We'll be right back after this.